Today on Locked On Canadiens, we try to compare this team to the last one that went to the Stanley Cup Final, and then we try to see what a Lane Hutson contract extension would look like.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Canadiens. We want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day every day. As you know, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. My name is Laura Sab, also known as the Active Stick, and I'm joined, as always, by the wonderful and very patient Ian Boisvert, also known as Maybe It's Ian. We have survived a Wednesday after an extremely late recording on the Tuesday night, and we're so glad that you guys enjoyed that episode. You're enjoying the Stanley the run the Canadiens are on as much as we are. Ian, how are you on this fine, slightly chilly Wednesday evening?
Yeah, we talked before we started the show today about how Wednesday felt like a scheduled loss for us as professionals, right?
Yeah.
We looked at the schedule, saw 9:00, knew we had to do a show afterwards. I was like, Wednesday's going to be a tough one. We're just going to have to, grit our teeth, put our head down, and just try to make it through the day. And we made it. We're at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Can't complain. We have one more of these late games this week, and then we still have the California trip to come, which is concerning.
Which is a while down the line, but we'll worry about that when we get to it. Ian, I don't know about you, but a bunch of people today told me I look tired. I don't know if any of our listeners got that, but yeah. And I was just like, talk to the Habs, not me. Speaking of the Habs,
Gary's fault.
We got a really interesting question in our YouTube comments, and I'm just going to pull it up so that I can make sure that I get it accurately. I love this username, by the way. The username is Died on Sunday. And the question is, I know it's way too early, but somebody's got to ask it. Is this team more talented than the 2021 team that made the finals? I know Price was magic and we had Hall of Fame grinders, but that team was old and got very balanced scoring. The rookies Suzuki and Caulfield were number 1 and number 3 in our top 3 of playoff scoring already. Armia had 8 points, Gallagher had 6 points, as did Anderson, and Jake Evans had 4 in 7 games. And don't forget, he got injured as well by the coward Mark Scheifele. Dano had 3 points. Weber, Petrie, and Edmondson, our top 3D, had 6 points each, with only 1 goal between the 3 of them. In that run, all the defensemen combined had 4 goals. Now, yet again, Price was magic with a sparkling .924 save percentage and a 2.28 goals against average on 20 shots a game. But let's not act like we haven't seen more unheralded goalies, such as Halak, be a world-beating goalie before. Truly, though, if the second line can get rolling as well, this might be the most complete squad I've seen since 1993. It really sounds like hyperbole, but after what we've watched recently, we should all think about it. So I think we have to kind of break this down into different thoughts, because I do agree that this team is more complete than the ones we're used to watching, especially if you factor in the future, right? Especially if you factor in growth. But in terms of talent, I'm not quite sure, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to discount anything that the Canadiens have done. So I kind of I think a little bit later, maybe in our second segment, I also want to talk about the front office and the coaching as well. I think it's really important to compare that as well. But I think in terms of this team, the point that I do want to make that gives me hope. Sorry, Ian, I know you're preparing your
I'm
thoughts
stewing.
on this.
I'm thinking.
You're stewing. So the point that I want to make is that very much like this user made is that we had Hall of Famers that were grinders on that team, right? They were way past their prime. But think about how excited we were to have them on the team, particularly, at the time. And again, Corey Perry, everything that he's done in the recent years, we're not condoning that in any way. But the moment he arrived in Montreal, remember how heartbroken we were when he signed elsewhere, right? He brought a lot to this team, even though he was on the downswing of his career. You're talking about Eric Stahl. You're talking about, So I do want to make the point that there were players that were elite, like Shea Weber, Stahl, Corey Perry, whoever you want to talk about, that the Canadiens only acquired once they were past their prime. So if I want to compare the talent, there are players on this team that have the ability to be those guys, such as a Lane Hutson, Uri Slavkovsky, or Ivan Demidov. There's players that the Canadiens have that, 15 years from now, somebody's going to be like, Ivan Demidov is on this team. He's tired AF, but he's on my team for the Stanley Cup run, right? And, again, our hope for all of these superstars is that they retire in Montreal. We never have to see them in another jersey. But all of this to say is that the one thing that I think is comparable is that the Canadiens legitimately have people on their team that have the potential to be Hall of Famers in the future, that have the potential to be those difference makers, right? But at the same time, I think we have to look at the roster as a whole, and I think we can't have our judgment clouded by how excited we are. And we have to be really realistic. And obviously, we're just going to remove the goaltending out of the equation entirely, because unless Jakub Dobeš is about to become the next best goaltender in the world, you're not going to be able to compare that to when the Canadiens had Carey Price. That's just how it is. Whoever comes in, and again, we've got Fowler in the pipelines and all of that. So unless one of those people, so that position, I don't want to compare. But I think elsewhere we can do those comparisons.
I just love how we went from in October getting emails and messages about how they need to fire the coach and about how none of this was going to work, and the doomerism had set in before Canadian Thanksgiving. And now we are
fired
getting
all the
questions.
coaches, by the way.
Yeah, all
the
of them.
coaches.
No one ever mentions Trevor Letowski though. It's just Marty and Stefan Robida. And now we're getting this, where we're questioning whether or not this team is better than the one that went on the most miraculous run we've seen since '93. I don't want to be the guy that tells everybody to chill out, so I won't. If you want to feel these things, you feel these things. I'm really high on this team too. I love this team. The team that we're watching every night rules. It's so much fun to be able to come home at the end of the day and sit down on the couch and watch a game that matters again, right? We haven't done this in a while, and I think that's really fun. And I get to come on and do this show and talk about how great everything is. The one thing that there's a lot of differences between these two teams. One, that team had a reason to play. Two reasons to play, if we're being realistic. It was Carey Price and Shea Weber. Outside of their skill, outside of their Hall of Fame careers, the room kind of got the idea that it was it for those guys, right? They all, it was very secretive how Weber was going through his treatment, but they all kind of knew something was up. You could tell by the way at the end of that series, they all kind of hugged Weber because they knew it was over. This team doesn't have that. They don't need it. They also don't need it. That's not a criticism. You don't need that when you're in the mode that you're in right now. They're playing for each other, which is what Marty has been saying for weeks now, that he wants them to play for each other, and they are. I also have a really hard time because I think it's a bit of revisionist history that we keep going back to that team as if there were no expectations going into the regular season. I'm not talking about going into the playoffs. Going into the playoffs, I thought they were going to get crushed. We all did. Yeah. We thought we thought it was Leafs in 3, right? We all thought that.
And we never wanted to be the team that lost to the Leafs.
And we still weren't. Tampa, chumps, take away the cups, take the banners down. You lost to Toronto.
And give us Braden Point.
Yeah, but that team was supposed to perform, right? Yeah. That team was supposed, they got Tyler Toffoli for that reason, to step in and perform, and he was their leading scorer. Jeff Petrie was still kind of in peak Jeff Petrie mode. Nick Suzuki was just on the way up. So was Jesperi Kotkaniemi, just on the way up. That one obviously didn't work out. They got the depth pieces that a Stanley Cup contender would go get. Their path was the easiest it could have been, given the fact that they were coming out of the weakest of the 4 divisions that were created in that weird COVID season. That team was supposed to be good, and it was great at the beginning, and then they slumped for a while, and Julien got fired, and they barely figured it out by the end of the year, if they did, by the end of the regular season. They scraped into the final playoff spot in that division, and then they just went on a miracle run. Eric Gustafsson was playing regular minutes for the Montreal Canadiens on that playoff run, and I bet none of you remember it because it didn't matter, Yeah. So I enjoy this team right now. I've often said that this is the most fun you'll have watching this team until they win a Stanley Cup, because we're watching them become something in front of us. We're watching them leave behind we're just going to lose 6-1 every night and none of it matters.
Yeah.
They're leaving that in the dust. They're becoming something. This is fun. So like this question, well, I don't necessarily agree with it in the sense that I don't think that this team right now, but could this team right now beat the team that went to the Cup final? Like if you could put together the rosters in like NHL 25, which roster would win? I'm taking the one with Carey Price and Shea Weber every time.
I do want to, like, to your point about having those two guys to play for, in our next segment, I do want to talk a little bit about managing expectations. I want to talk a little bit about front office, attitude, all of that kind of stuff. So that's coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed Sponsored Jobs puts your post at the top of the page to help you reach the right candidates faster. Honestly, I've been in that spot where you need to hire and you need to hire right away, and it has to be the right person because you're on deadlines, you have deliverables, and that's exactly when you would need Indeed Sponsored Jobs, and that would come in handy because they make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. And now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right. So I want to quickly go back to what you were talking about, having those two guys to play for. They had something to play for. They had guys to play for. I think that the fact that this team doesn't is also an advantage because right now they're not on a time crunch. There's not a person on this team, unless, you were talking Brendan Gallagher and I don't know what their relationship with him is like. And I'm sure they love him, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not seeing this team laying everything down for him to win a cup, right? And he's also still got a little bit of time. Like he's proven that he's got, there's the fountain of youth thing going. But they know that they have plenty of time. They have plenty of additions coming. They have plenty of time to grow. Unless you're somebody like a Josh Anderson or a David Savard or a Christian Dvorak, knowing that you're probably not going to be on this team when they're lifting the cup, and you maybe want to be, like the rest of the team, you're talking about them playing for each other. It's because they have the time. They can be relaxed. We saw them have such a long leash when they were making mistakes, right? And at the same time, they were given little pushes here and there, whether it's Kent Hughes speaking with Juraj Slafkovsky, whether it's Justin Barron being traded for Carrier. Like the luxury of time is the advantage in this case because they're able to grow without fear. And there's not something hanging over their head, right? So while I do think that, and the second is about managing expectations, I think that like before we call it and we say, this team can beat that team or this team, is more talented or more complete, we have to let some things play out. We have to see how they grow. We have to see if Lane Hutson, after this year, can he make that sustainable, right? We have to see, like, is Nick Suzuki going to hit that 8 point per game or 90 game, whatever it is? Is he going to hit that pinnacle? We have to see if Cole Caulfield, who we're predicting will score 40 goals every year since he joined the league, will he score 40 goals this year? Is he going to become what we think? We have to give Kirby Dach time. We were so happy with him in our What's Up Doc segment yesterday. We are happy with him, but can he sustain that, right? We don't know if Patrick Laine is going to be part of the long-term plan. He's definitely a big component of the short-term. So I think we have to let it play out. Like what happens when Ivan Demidov comes here and starts playing in North America, right? What happens with this defense, right? Like where does Caden Gooley end up? Like Mike Matheson might not be here when they're contending. So how is their top 4D going to be composed, right? Like we haven't written off Logan Mailloux. We haven't, there's so many things that we still don't know. And we've got players all waiting in the wings, like Owen Beck, Michael Hage, right? There's so many things that we still don't know. And those things are going to remain unknown for quite some time because unfortunately, I don't think the Canadiens are going to be in a position to be like, let's say in a conference final and for us to understand if those guys are ready for a win, right? if they have that experience instinct. And the other point I wanted to make is that by the time they are in that position, I don't think they're going to have Corey Perry experience or Eric Stahl experience, because I expect them to be way younger, right? Like your Nick Suzuki's and your Cole Caulfields. But I expect them to have a lot more experience than this. And I expect that their setbacks will be true setbacks, right? Expected to contend and don't, right? Playoff exit after a great regular season, things like that. Like they haven't had that experience yet as a whole, as a team. They haven't had that bitterness. And we see teams that have seen that, like Tampa Bay. Remember, they got swept by the Montreal Canadiens. And then that kicked off like multiple years of contending. You see the setbacks in Toronto, they just keep repeating it over and over again, right? So you have to have that experience. You have to have the right mindset. You have to have the right talent. And you also have to have the right management and coaching in order for that to be, so that you go the Tampa route or the Chicago or LA route, and not the Toronto route. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this, Ian. I'm so sorry. I just keep talking,
I'm letting you cook. It's you're cooking right now. It's all you.
All right.
I think it's funny you mentioned Toronto and Tampa, because you know who also just mentioned Toronto and Tampa in this exact sentiment was Kent Hughes in his midseason press conference. He did the same thing, because those are things like Tampa showed that the progress to the Stanley Cup is not linear, right? You can have setbacks. They got swept by, you mentioned the sweep against Montreal. The sweep against Columbus was earth-shattering, right? They won the President's Trophy. They had the best, at the time, it was the best season anybody had ever had, and they lost in the first round to a team that had never won a playoff series before. So, it's I think that because that connection right between what you said and what Kent Hughes said, the management sets the expectations, right? The coach sets the expectations. If it was up to the players, the expectation would be Stanley Cup or bust every year. And we know that. Remember Joel Edmondson, was it last year at the golf tournament? He said the tank was, or 2 years ago at the golf tournament, the tank was last year. Now we're winning. Now we're going to the playoffs. But no, the teams know better, Joel. And the management sets that expectation. In the mix, who did that come from? That came from Marty. That came from the front office. So those guys are sort of the holders of that message. They have to control that message. And I think they're doing a pretty good job, quite honestly. Kent Hughes in his midseason press conference was very complimentary of the way that his team played, but also kind of, I think in as many words, he said, we haven't done anything yet. We haven't accomplished anything. We're still hungry. We want to build on what we have. There's things that we can still improve on. So I think they've done a great job of controlling that message. Comparatively to we were talking about that Bergevin era team that went to the Cup final. Like there was never this kind of messaging. The messaging was always make it to the playoffs. Who knows what happens? That was never a coherent thought. And we were told that it was, he's got a plan. He never had a plan. Like the Canadiens, I think what's interesting about Kent Hughes right now is this is where they expected the team to be. But before that was 2 months of apathy, right? We saw it again. We saw it play out. So, it's kind of interesting to think about how Kent Hughes is going to operate the rest of the season, thinking, yes, they're playing well right now. How much longer do I need to buy into this version of how we're performing before I completely throw away what happened at the beginning of the year and decide we're not selling, we're going to try to make a run at the playoffs here? I don't know that he's there yet, at least from what I could tell in that press conference. It doesn't seem like he's not convinced, but this team could very easily lapse again, and we don't know what that looks like and how long it takes them to pull themselves out of it. So I find that the expectations around this team are like the most entertaining part of the narrative, because it seems to be changing on a weekly basis. So it's a fascinating point to be made that like the expectations on this team are everything. It's how we interact and how we hold a standard to this team.
Yeah. And so really quickly, I do want to compare the front offices just very, very quickly is, you were talking about back in there was no plan and all of that. And I think that's extremely true. And I feel like Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes, they do have a plan, but they're not willing to deviate from it. Whereas with the previous regime, like there was a plan, the plan was incorrect. Like their idea of how to win games was incorrect. and they stuck to it too long, and then they only made reactionary moves. Whereas Kent Hughes was making proactive moves. What team that you know isn't going to make a Stanley Cup run do you trade for Patrick Laine for? You know what I mean? Like, why in year 2.5 of your rebuild are you making a huge splash on the trade market? Because he has the plan and he's not reacting. He's being proactive. He wanted to reward the team. But let's not kid ourselves. He also wanted them to learn from a superstar. He wanted them to learn how to play with a superstar. He wanted his talent to rub off on the team, and he wanted, like, you know what I mean? He wanted to teach the team something. And so, you know, we talk about the Utah game when Cole Caulfield scored, like there was this gif going around of Ken Hughes' face, and people were talking about how smug he is. I think he looked delighted. I don't think he was smug.
Even if he is smug, wear it.
Right, exactly. But what I think was he was delighted, but like his face did not look like he lives and dies by every goal because his job is not on the line. Whereas Marc Bergevin, every loss he would be freaking out. Every win he would be celebrating like there was no tomorrow, even in those years where the Canadiens weren't accomplishing anything. And it's because like he like the path was not steady. It was not linear. There was like the plan did not work out and they had no other options ready.
Yeah. And you mentioned the trade. There's a smaller version of that. It's the Carrier trade. And I know people will say, oh, that's them giving up on Barron. Partially, yes. But the other part was I need to get a defenseman who can play with Caden Gooley.
Exactly.
And they found the perfect defenseman for Caden Gooley. Like we cannot overstate that they found the perfect defenseman for Caden Gooley, and the price was Justin Barron. Like that's how you do business in this league. So like I completely agree with you. It's proactive. He understands the needs of this team and how to address them in a modern way and not in a, you know, the way that the old guy used to do it.
Speaking of all of that, in terms of addressing things in a modern way, the defense of this team and the plans and everything, Lane Hutson will be eligible to sign a contract extension on July 1st. There's already talk about that. Should we be worried? Should we be excited? All that coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. This episode is also brought to you by Gametime. How much do I love going to live events, whether it's a sports game, whether it's music, theater, sports game, whatever, a hockey game, music, theater, comedy, all that kind of stuff. Like my favorite memories are all revolving around time I spend at events with the people I love, the energy, the excitement, all of that. And now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I was looking for tickets to an upcoming game using the Gametime app. With Gametime Picks, I found amazing deals and I could even see the view from my seat before buying. The super deal was particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, I toggled the app's all-in pricing feature and it showed me the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's talk about Lane Hutson. Something we all love to talk about. Should we be worried that Lane Hutson's going to be too expensive come July?
Maybe not this July. I think there's the conversation I kind of want to have here is they have the opportunity to extend Lane Hutson this upcoming summer. Kent Hughes has shown an appetite for wanting to get that done ahead of time with players who are entering into restricted free agent deals. He did it with Gooley coming out of his ELC. He did it for Caulfield. He did it for Suzuki. Was Suzuki's coming out of his ELC? Well, that was actually Bergevin. That wasn't even him, so never mind. Yeah. They did it with Slavkovsky. I feel like that's a trend. I feel like they want to get ahead of these, knowing full well that the salary cap is going up. And it's going to go up even more than we thought. I know Alan Walsh on Agent Provocateur said that the 25-26 salary cap is expected to be $97 million, which is a $9 million increase from what it is currently, which is the largest increase in history. So the onus here is on the Canadiens to get a deal in front of Lane Hutson that he would sign instead of waiting another year where he could potentially be winning a Norris Trophy, and instead of waiting for that to hit, trying to get him under contract as soon as possible. The problem that I foresee happening is, if I'm Lane Hutson, why the heck am I doing that? Why am I, you're going to put 8x8 in front of me because there's this artificial cap on Nick Suzuki where you can't go higher than his contract. That's going to need to end, by the way. I know we all keep talking about it as if it's some noble thing to do that for your captain. It's fine right now. But like, if you're expecting that Ivan Demidov in the center of his NHL career is going to be making less than $8 million, that means he's playing for another team. He's not playing for Montreal.
Here's the thing, though. Like, for me, the conversation isn't, can I sign for more than Nick Suzuki? It's, do I bring more value than Nick Suzuki does? Then I have a legitimate case, right? So if you want to sign for more than Nick Suzuki, like, I don't think that that's a hard cap forever. I think it's a cap for now.
Yeah, it can't be a cap forever.
Yeah,
because that means you're letting Laine walk, which might happen anyway. But that's the first shoe to fall. It means you're not getting Lane Hutson signed for any meaningful period of time. You're not signing Ivan Demidov for any extended period of time. I think we need to get over the cap hit as that potential cap, and we need to look at the percentage of the cap instead, because that's going to be what's important. With the salary cap approaching, I mean, if next year it's going to go up $9 million to 97, the year after that, like we're well over $100 million for a salary cap. So that changes the calculus of this a lot. We keep getting questions from folks about, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more in depth in our mailbag, but about how teams are deferring money, and they're deferring money in contracts to keep the cap hits down now, and they pay them longer. The problem with that, I don't know that that gives the Canadiens any
advantage.
Well, it gives them an advantage in that it keeps the cap hit down. I don't know that it gives them a disadvantage, but the problem is that the player has to want to do it. And why would they? Like, there's no, you would have to pay them for a longer period of time. You would have to give them more time. You would have to give them, something to make that worth their while, because they want to take their money and they want to do stuff with it now, as opposed to it just sitting in the team's bank account and not doing anything for them. So with the concept of Lane Hutson, I mean, it's every day that cap hit's going up, and it's never going to go back down. So the Montreal Canadiens, I know it sounds very dire for something that's not even going to happen until July at the earliest, but the pressure should be on them to make a contract here, to get something signed between them and Lane Hutson, because that number is never going to get lower. Start
that conversation before he's a finalist for the Calder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can't negotiate it, but they all do. It's fine. Yeah. Well, how do they all have contracts ready exactly on July 1st? Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Wow, it happens every year. So it's something to just to track this year, and with the cap going up, it's going to be easier for the Canadiens to get that done. Just taking into account Kent Hughes' thoughts on getting these guys locked up, before they hit the level of play that the contract would pay for, because the alternative is the Toronto Maple Leafs, where you walk all of these guys up to their free agent years and they shake you upside down until the money stops falling out. And that's why they don't have anything outside of a second line. They have two lines, and they have some defenders. That can't be the case in Montreal. Like, they have to get these done early, so that in a few years we're going, wow, every single one of those contracts is a steal.
Exactly.
That's how you win Stanley Cups.
Yeah. And you do. And the thing is, like, I don't think players are leaving like $10 million on the table, right? No. Like, they're leaving like maybe a couple of years on the table, or they're sacrificing like $1 million or $2 million. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, because at the time that they're signing these, like when they're young and they're signing these contracts, like, there's still a lot of good faith that's going into it. It's not like they've proven it, right? Like, you're not seeing them after they've won 3 or 4 awards and they are legitimately in their prime. So there is an element of risk that the team is taking on, and that's part of the argument where you pay them an economical salary. All right.
Yep.
You guys should send us your thoughts on all of this too. We were very passionate today. I think we had a lot of feelings. But it's time for our trivia. Ian, do you remember what yesterday's question is? Because I really don't.
Yes. Which goaltender did the Canadiens select using their highest draft pick? So all time, which goalie was selected using the most valuable pick? Super Rain got the answer. Is Michel Place, 298 games, in the National Hockey League, some with Montreal, some with Pittsburgh, some other teams thrown in there too. So Michel Place, it is not Carey Price who went 5th. Michel Place went 1st overall in the draft that he was selected.
Yes, we had someone via email also answer this question. Let me just shout them out because they sent us a beautiful picture of their family with his son's first game. It was Emmanuel R via email who sent us a picture of himself, his wife, and his child. I'm assuming that's his wife, hopefully.
Lovely.
At the Bell Center very recently, a few weeks ago, and they like the smile on the faces is just so beautiful. Like I love that stuff. Keep sending it to us.
A family program. You love to see it.
Yes.
All right. Today's questions. The question. The Montreal Canadiens had a fantastic draft in 1984, as all of their first 4 selections went on to play over 1,000 games in the NHL. Of the successful foursome, who played the most games for the Montreal Canadiens? So who played the most games in Montreal in their career among those who played 1,000 games for them coming out of the 1984 draft? So if you have that answer, and these are capital G guys, you will know all of these players who played those 1,000 games. So if you have the answer, send it to us any way you know how. On YouTube, we'll pin whoever gets it right first, and we'll shout you guys out on the next episode of the show.
Yes, and the Anyway You Know How is all over social media. You will find us at Locked On Canadiens on the following platforms. We are on TikTok. We are on Instagram. We are on Blue Sky. You can send us the answers there, but also send us mailbag questions because it is the Friday episode. It's Friday mailbag. It is going to be a late game, but we will make time for the mailbag questions for sure. And again, you can send them to us at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com and any of the places I just mentioned. Please subscribe. Please tell your friends. Subscribe on YouTube. We're free and available everywhere. You'll find my co-host at Maybe It's Ian all over social media. You'll find me at The Active Stick. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.